Now, one after the other, the Chinese Communist Party is eliminating its ministers. They are either dead or have been mysteriously missing for months together. It started off with journalists and activists who raised their voices of dissent against the regime. It then shifted to the Chinese entrepreneurs who were becoming too big for their shoes. And then came Xi's ministers who were caught having affairs with sports stars and journalists. A heavy price had to be paid by these people, by these sports stars and journalists and other activists who were in any association with Xi's ministers. Now, there are other instances of the ministers making a disappearing act for not pledging allegiance to Xi Jinping. Now, the ex-Chinese premier is dead. The state media in China has claimed that he died of a heart attack. Now, it was well known that the former premier was amongst the dwindling number of leaders who were not part of the Xi's coterie. Xi Jinping's fear psychosis knows no bound. He has refused to attend conferences and forums abroad for the fear that he might get assassinated. He removes anyone who dissents against him to ensure that his position remains secure. How long can Xi Jinping's dictatorship last is the question I ask. Let's start off this conversation with Vijay Kranti. Vijay Kranti, a grim situation, the fact that there have been mysterious deaths, that there have been disappearances of Xi Jinping's key ministers, and it started off, like I said in my introduction, with these activists and journalists who came out dissenting against Xi Jinping. It has now reached to a level that even Xi's ministers are being thrown into the gallows, killed, disappeared, and nobody in the world knows what happened of them.
Yeah, I've been watching China for quite a few years, at least last 50 years as a professional.
Volume.
And I see a great similarity between the previous, the first chairman, late chairman Mao, and the current chairman Xi Jinping. I am discovering that Xi Jinping is trying to become the second Mao, and in so many ways. Number one, on politically, the recent, after Deng Xiaoping, things have been appearing to be more liberal as far as communism's rigidity is concerned. If China has been more focused on economic development and less on the religious. In China, communism is a religion. The Communist Party's grip, that rigidity was not as much there as now is visible or as it is returning. In Mao's days, communist ideology was the last word, and Mao himself was the last word, and his red book became the Bible. And now with Xi Jinping, his own, that book of thoughts, it is going to school kids and to everybody, and it is being treated as a Bible. And Mao, there is another similarity which I am seeing. Mao, in his time, especially during Cultural Revolution, he used Cultural Revolution decade to eliminate anybody who was a threat to Communist Party of India or of China, or who was a threat or a challenge to his supremacy. And the way he used schoolboys, college boys and girls to denounce and even kill in public trials many political leaders of smaller status or bigger status, and they were killed in hundreds of thousands. Anybody who could be a threat to Mao was eliminated, not by himself. He would shoot anybody, but he would use Red Guards who would raid the houses of political leaders, spit on them, take them out for public trial, insult them, and even kill them. So this is how Mao eliminated. Xi Jinping is a more refined version, as I can see, of Mao Zedong. He is not hanging people publicly. He's not
doing that up until now. You never know what the future holds.
Yeah. But this is what he is doing. He is eliminating anybody who could be a challenge to him. And Li Keqiang, unfortunately, who died at 68 last night. He died. There was no sign or history of his any serious sickness. Only history he had was that he was on the other camp of Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping, he was in the blacklist of Xi Jinping. So that was his only fault. I'm not sure he was killed or died, but he is now no more a threat to Xi Jinping. And this is exactly what he is doing with anybody. You just think of Alibaba's head. You think of hundreds of corporate houses whose bosses became very big, and he found that he found himself uncomfortable in their presence because of their financial clout or their clout outside China because of their business and their investments. So many of them were eliminated. They removed or he reduced them to near paupers before they showed their face in public. Or even a player like Peng Shui, who just raised voice against one of his
and the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is even able to manipulate, influence the International Olympic Committee, because there were voices that were being raised by players internationally. Initially, the International Olympic Committee was questioning Xi Jinping and his party about the disappearance of the tennis player, and later there was a change in stance. Later there was a change in tack in how the International Olympics Committee chairperson came out in support of Xi Jinping, in support of China, in support of the Chinese Communist Party. So that is the kind of influence and clout that China has across the globe, whether it is United Nations, UNSC, Olympics, UNESCO, you name it, and China has its claws dug in deep. In such a situation, Patikrit, the question arises, how can the democracies of the world fight out the much vested power, resources that China has invested carefully for a long period of time to become the second largest economy? But the shrewdness with which the Chinese have played this game is reflective.
First of all, couple of points. Number one, except for India, I don't think any of the Western democracies are interested in fighting China. Most of them actually don't want to. They are intimidated by China. I don't think the European countries are in any position to actually challenge China. They are in doldrums. Their democracy, their wokeism has made sure everything within their own country are in doldrums. So far as what China has done, look, whether we like it or not, I am a strong critic of the Chinese Communist Party, but whether we like it or not, China has invested in these things over the last 30, 40 years. First, they used their economic policy in terms of creating the economy of scale, the special economic zones. Then they, as part of their project 87863, if I'm not mistaken, they invested in technologies, they built those scales, and today they're exactly doing what the Americans have done for a long period of time in terms of creating the clout across the world. So when we talk about whether and how we should contain and challenge, I think for a country like India, yes, I think we have the potential to do that. And I'm sure the government of India has in its policy to take the right action in terms of developing those capacities over a period of time. And I'm sure someday we will be a big contender to Chinese hegemony, and we are already a contender in many ways. But I don't think the Western countries are interested in terms of containing China. See, so far as the internal issues of China are concerned, first, the institutional framework of the world, it has always been, we have an issue in terms of saying that multilateral institutions need to be far more democratic, needs to be far more inclusive, which they are not. Whoever funds them, they speak for them, and that is a flaw which has been extracted and leveraged for a long time by the West. The Chinese are doing the same thing now, and I think that's where the reforms in multilateral institution is so much in vogue today. Countries like India, led by India, and the whole of global South wants that. So far as the internal issues of China are concerned, Megha, I can say a couple of things. First of all, we can only speculate about what is happening in China. Yes, it is true what is happening in China is strange, but it is not completely out of the box. That's how the Chinese, or rather the communist regimes actually work like that. they would have intra-party factionalism, rivalries, and they tend to cut each other down by killing each other's deputies rather than trying to, cut each other's throat. So it has been going on. Vijay is very right that they are going back to the era of Mao in terms of what they're doing, maybe in a more refined manner. I do not think what Xi Jinping is doing right now politically that will have any challenge within China. The challenge would perhaps be more profound if there is an era of de-dollarization and recession. If it becomes more profound in the whole of Western Europe and United States, it would have a severe economic impact within China that can have a ripple effect, not the political actions alone. Internationally, yes, this is a model they have taken from the West in terms of controlling the institutional framework globally. And I think we have to work out in terms of having our own people over there. It will take time, but I'm sure over a period of time we have learned how the Chinese are playing the game and we will be able to counter it. Megha.
Tenzin, coming to you to get a comment with regards to how China has built its hegemony across the globe, second largest economy of the world. It's no joke. Like Patikrit said, it has been over the years of, 40, 50 years that it has been able to make its foundation so strong that it has influence in all multilateral organizations and bodies across the globe. Now, with the West looking at Southeast Asia, looking at Global South, wanting to have a contender strong enough to China, which is India, and the potential that India holds in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific region, and how long does it take for India to have a strong, contending, powerful relationship with the world and against China is again a matter of time.
Well, firstly, when we are talking about China today, one of the reasons why China has been rising for almost about 30 years is because China promised economic development. Even when there was no sense of free speech, freedom of religion, democracy, elected leadership, consensus building, it was pure dictatorship, and that we have seen. Even though there was no sense of freedom and democracy in that country, the single largest factor that subsequent Chinese leaders led China up until this point today, when Xi Jinping is the president, is a promise of development and freedom from poverty. Now, that very factor is at stake today. There is economic meltdown in China. China is now being isolated by many countries in Europe, in America, in India, and many other countries in Asia also. So when that very factor that promised Chinese people that there would be enough food and there will be a development in the country, when that is at stake, is in a position where he is having to choose political authority over economic development. The zero COVID policy was one such case where there was collapse in economic activities, and yet just to maintain his political authority, he made the choice. So now we see that from today onwards, from this year onwards, 2023, we see that India is much better poised to be the next leader than China. But we are also, Megha, we are discussing this at a time when Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang died in a mysterious situation. So this is pointing all of us to one strange situation that China has been visiting for a very long time. In China, Mao Zedong took the leadership, the prime ministers always played a role, whether it was Lin Piao, Liu Xiaoji, or Hu Youbang, or Zhao Ziang, or Li Beng. And now here today, when the prime minister dies in such a situation, it is now making Xi Jinping think of Tiananmen Square, which happened because of Chinese Prime Minister Hu Yaobang, who died in that kind of a situation, and that people overwhelmingly poured their emotion and demanded freedom and democracy. Xi Jinping must be losing his mind, or at the same time, it is possible that this must have been one of his own designs to kick out the Prime Minister in the previous Prime Minister in this situation.
Okay, fair enough. But this, by Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping's design, comes an inherent fear psychosis, which is very reflective. Captain Alok Bansal, there have been a number of times that Xi Jinping has refused to attend these conferences and forums that are taking place abroad. This definitely shows how fearful Xi Jinping is about his life. When we take a look at the dissenters and ministers that are making a disappearing act or getting killed, or we don't know their whereabouts, it is fear psychosis that is very reflective of the CCP and particularly Xi Jinping. Does that then limit how the CCP and Xi Jinping are then going to last in China? As everybody has been giving the example of the Mao regime, and it had to come to an end.
But Mao regime came to an end almost after 3 decades. Please remember that.
Yeah.
And I think you need to understand, when Xi Jinping had come to power, I had actually predicted that it actually shows return to Maoist authoritarianism. And this I said almost 10, 15 years back when Xi Jinping was making a comeback. So we need to be very categorical. When authoritarianism rises, there are both advantages and disadvantages. You saw in Maoist era, Mao would one day decide a great leap forward. Then he'll say, let 100 flowers bloom, and then you'll have a cultural revolution. We have already seen in Xi Jinping's case, the authoritarianism creating problems for China. You saw zero COVID policy, which actually ruined China's economy to a very great extent. So authoritarianism has its pitfalls. Now, whether Li Keqiang died or was killed, we need to be careful. He must have been under immense pressure because the faction that he belonged to, Communist Youth League faction, which was Hu Jintao's faction earlier, has been completely marginalized. Actually, Communist Youth League of China has been completely marginalized within the party structure. At one stage, it was 2 factions, and Princelings and Youth League, and now that's been marginalized. So he must have been under immense pressure. Please remember, even Mao did not hang anybody publicly. He actually persecuted. The Chinese style of persecution is a person is asked to make his self-condemnation. If you would have seen during Cultural Revolution, Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, and if we go back, even before Cultural Revolution, starting from Gao Gang and Rao Shushi, the Communist Party leaders have regularly been consigned to dustbins of history. In fact, Peng Dehuai, who was one of the marshals of the Chinese army, was actually had to go down. And of course, Lin Biao, we know. So Communist Party has had this tradition. But after Mao's passing away, this sort of a thing had reduced. We did see Mao's chosen successor, Huo Guofeng, was again sidelined. And now if we come back, as Tenzing said about Hu Yaobang's death, who was actually the subsequent successor and whose dying actually led to Tiananmen Square. I don't think so Li Keqiang is as popular as Hu Yaobang was. He was a very popular man and he did try to introduce certain dimensions of democracy within the Communist Party of China, which was immediately curtailed after Hu Yaobang. And of course, subsequently what happened to Zhao Ziyang, we all know very, very well.
Okay.
With this sort of a thing, the leader obviously becomes insecure because he's holding all the levers of power. He's extremely vulnerable. And we saw during COVID also that Xi Jinping was reluctant to move around. He was very, very reluctant. And now probably he doesn't want to move out because he's not confident. He's not confident somebody will assassinate him outside.
Yeah.
He's not confident that his hold over the party will remain if he's outside the country.
That's why I think the two leaders, the Russian only travels to China, and China, so Xi Jinping goes and makes visit to President Putin in Moscow. All right. Again, Vijay Kranti, now the question arises, you all have raised this point, but when when the world could not really do anything, when COVID struck, the World Health Organization ended up giving China a clean sheet. We've seen how the Chinese had been able to take over Tibet and nobody batted an eyelid. Aksai Chin has been ceded to China back in the day, in the 1960s. Nothing could be done at that point of time. When Chinese vessels and warships transgress into maritime territories of ASEAN, there's a hue and cry and protests that are made, but is something really actually done on the ground? Now, in such a scenario, I wouldn't talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, but there is at this point of time also a little bit of a growing clout that China is enjoying in the Middle East, as well as at least when you take a look at the Eastern Europe region, we take about Iran and Qatar, there has been this overture that has been made by the Middle East towards the Chinese, and that's a cause of concern as well.
Yeah, there is no doubt that China has arrived a position where, in addition to being a source of nuisance, which it used to be, now it has arrived a situation where it can seriously influence the direction of the international politics and events. What we are seeing today in the Middle East, now the Chinese warships are arriving there, and China is openly denouncing Israel and saying that they are reacting out of proportion and they should not do it. And China's clout, as you mentioned, in United Nations, WHO, etc., China has played its game very, very well over past few decades. China, which used to be a pariah and untouchable in the international community, after getting into United Nations and especially after Deng Xiaoping's era, when the economic progress came and China was able to amass billions and trillions of dollars at the cost of his own friends in the West. Now China has financial resources, which it is using, as I said, very intelligently over past few decades. China has invested tons of money, not only in the economy of small nations. More than that, it has focused on buying the leadership, corrupting the leadership of small countries. You start from Pakistan and you in Sri Lanka, Nepal, and then in African countries by dozens.
Yeah.
China has bought influence there, and China is now in a position to buy votes and influence the process of United Nations institutions.
Right.
If WHO was not in a position to blame China or bring China to account on an issue like COVID, I don't think anybody would be ever able to do, because China has so many votes. And because of these votes, I am laughing because recently China became again a member of the Human Rights Council. You can imagine a country which is the biggest flouter of human rights laws and ethics is now practically ruling the United Human Rights Council, where nobody can even discuss.
Right.
Not vote with China. China does not allow a vote to be discussed. So any vote which decides whether an issue should be discussed or not, any criticism against China is defeated at that level before starting any discussion.
Absolutely.
So we would see that China is using its influence, and now it is for the Western allies, Western countries, to correct their own
I'm
mistakes.
sorry, I'll have to interrupt you, sir. I'm short of time. I need to take other panelists as well. 30 seconds, Patikret. Then it's definitely not on the advantage of the rest of the world, India, US, Europe, to completely cut off ties. That's not a possibility. It cannot happen overnight. But the idea is to continue with the dialogue and overpower China with the tactics and the cunning that it uses and it has continued to use over decades to establish its might.
Megha, the Chinese philosophy has always been about hide your strength, bide your time. So you can have dialogues with them, but you will never be able to get the real picture. So I think for a country like India, we need to anticipate one thing. Xi Jinping is not going to be there forever. He will be there till 2027, if I'm not mistaken. What is he planning before 2027? He is not going to, he's not a status quoist. He's going to do something. And I think whoever is not falling in line with his plan, he's trying to purge them out. What is he planning? What is that big thing he's working on, strategizing? Maybe he will take another year to do. That is something we need to anticipate. He is not going to just go away like this. That is something, are we aware of it? As an individual with no access to, confidential information, I'm not aware. Maybe the governments of, government of India or other countries, maybe they're aware. That is the core issue. It's not about who is getting killed or who is getting ousted. What is the big plan of Xi Jinping before he leaves office in 2027? Is it Taiwan? Is it something in Tibet or something else?
Is Xi Jinping even going to lead? Because there was a change in law where Xi Jinping had become the president of the country for a lifetime. And that's what his agenda is. That's exactly, like everybody said, walking on the lines of what Mao and his regime and ideology was. Quickly, Tenzin, difficult situation. Tibet has witnessed it. India has witnessed it. We continue to fight Xi Jinping and CCP and PLA on the line of actual control, and even on the Western front, where Pakistan is now also growing belligerence in Manipur and its border along Myanmar.
Yeah, I think for China, it has now come to crossroads, and Xi Jinping has no access to go anywhere, right, left. Has come to a dead end, and the megalomaniac characteristic there we are getting to see in Xi Jinping's leadership is a clear sign that it is now going down. It's a point where Xi Jinping is leading the country down, and we are now seeing how United States' main foreign policy today is designed around China. It used to be around Soviet Union, then later Russia, and now United States is targeting China. China is a serious threat to US's supremacy, and that also leads to United States and its own allies. And Prakrit was earlier saying that India is standing up, but I think United States at the time when Donald Trump was the president, he was the one who took the first important initiative against China with that trade war. It was before the COVID time. So you see, a number of countries today are seriously threatened by China's supply chain trade punishments China has been doing, and a serious threat to US's supremacy. And now China is a threat to India. So as a Tibetan and as a Tibetan refugee, I'm much more hopeful that there is going to be a change within China, and China's relationship with all other countries who had fallen dependent on China. Those policies are changing. China is getting isolated.
All right.
This is the time for freedom.
Fair enough. Okay. Captain Alok Bansal, so it doesn't matter for the world who Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping kills or makes them disappear. Important part is that until the time that China is the second largest economy of the world, there is going to be negotiations, there is going to be dialogue, there is going to be trade that will continue.
See, in any case, what a country does in its internal affairs, we are really generally not bothered. We are now negotiating with Taliban. So what is there to criticize any other country? But the fact is, China is the second largest economy. We have a huge border dispute with it. And I don't think so Xi Jinping is going away in 2027. I don't think so. I have any indication that he's got. He'll only go when he goes to the grave. He's not going anywhere. He will follow Mao Zedong. Let there be no doubts in anybody's mind whatsoever. He has not given even one indication that he's going to quit in 2027. If he has said that also, I think we should forget it. Yeah. So he's, and like with any autocratic regime, there are pluses and minuses. It may be feasible to negotiate with him because there is only one center of power. You can actually make him to concede things which others may find it difficult to concede in earlier times. After Mao's time, it was difficult for Chinese leaders to unilaterally concede on issues which were contentious. So that's an advantage.
Okay.
On disadvantages, authoritarian regimes do take decisions which can prove to be catastrophic for the country as well as for the others.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. I'm out of time, but I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast. We'll keep a close eye on Xi Jinping and his whereabouts, his minister's whereabouts. But does it really solve the purpose when the world gets intimidated by the Chinese Communist Party?
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.